The Jets enter week 2 of the preseason, and they're certainly hoping Haason Reddick's replacements will shine. Let's talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, August 15th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have wound down, the sports have stopped sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the Jets enter week 2 of the preseason. They will play the Carolina Panthers in Carolina Saturday night, 7 p.m. Eastern. Game will be shown locally on WCBS2 as all preseason games are. And today we're going to talk about some of the players to watch for in that game. Now, Jets, I think, had a successful preseason opener against the Washington Commanders, and that kind of got swept under the rug because of all the Haason Reddick drama over the last week. But I think there was a lot to like about what happened in that preseason opener. Now, looking to week 2, let's talk about some of the key players to watch in this one. And I think, you may be tired of hearing about Haason Reddick, and I'm sorry if you are, but it really is the number one story on this team right now, because when you have a star who's holding out, it draws a lot of attention. And I think all eyes this weekend will be on the guys who could get the reps if Reddick is not a part of this team at the start of the regular season. And I think the two guys who the Jets will really be looking to step up are Will McDonald and Micheal Clemons, both of whom got about a quarter of action in the preseason opener against Washington. And I would assume that they're going to play again this weekend. Robert Saleh is always a bit dicey to try and figure out what his plans are. But since these guys played in week 1, I would not be surprised to see them get reps in week 2 of the preseason. Now, McDonald, I've seen him get a little grief for his performance online in some places, because there's been some talk, was he washed out of a lot of plays? Was he stonewalled a number of times? And I wrote an article this week on GangGreenNation.com about McDonald and the style of player he's going to have to be to succeed in this league. And one of the things that was interesting is that if you look at what McDonald was telling the press at the end of the 2023 season, he was saying, I'm going to bulk up this offseason. I'm going to get to 250, 255 pounds. He's listed on the team's roster at 236, and 236 is very small for a defensive end. And I know it's weird to say a 236-pound guy with the muscles McDonald has is small, because relative to other human beings, 236 in with the kind of muscles McDonald has, that's big. But at the defensive end position, 236 is quite small. So I think the plan when the Jets drafted him, and I mentioned this at the time the Jets drafted him, was for him to eventually bulk up, to add more weight. And McDonald said that he would heading into the offseason. He arrives at training camp, and Robert Saleh says he's playing at the same weight as he was as a rookie. And that's pretty small. Again, 236, 240 is like the outer limit for defensive end. So McDonald's right there. McDonald might be the smallest full-time defensive end in the NFL, or the smallest defensive end in the NFL, seeing an appreciable amount of playing time in the year 2024. And if that's the case, then it means that, you're going to have to live with him sometimes getting stonewalled, because he's just not big. He's not going to be able to use his arms to fight guys off. He's not going to be able to disengage. In Robert Saleh, when he talked about McDonald at the start of training camp, he compared him to Steph Curry. He said, we want McDonald to just get to the quarterback. Now, I don't know why Saleh is making that comparison. I think that puts very unrealistic expectations on Will McDonald. Will McDonald's not going to be the Steph Curry of defensive end pass rushers. But I think it's a sign that maybe, I don't know, when the Jets drafted McDonald, I felt to me like his frame was such that he could afford to add some bulk, and it wouldn't really impact his athleticism. It feels like the Jets have kind of changed their mind on that. It feels like the Jets believe that if he adds extra bulk, he won't be as fast, and the Jets essentially want him to be a speed rusher. So, in that game, I watched all his reps, and to be honest with you, a lot of the reps weren't terribly relevant because there were plays that were going away from him. What I saw from McDonald was there was one time he tried to speed rush to the outside. The speed rush to the outside is essentially you're just trying to outrun the the offensive tackle. You're just trying to beat him to the corner. You're not really putting many moves on him. And he was kind of stonewalled on that. Then later in the game, he threw a spin move on the guy where he kind of got up on the tackle, threw a spin move, beat him to the inside, hit the quarterback, and actually got a bogus flag roughing the passer, which it never should have been thrown. But it was a very good move. He got to the quarterback. And, in the article I wrote, I talked about how, a smaller guy like McDonald is going to have to win with those moves. He's going to have to either do the speed rush or do the spin move and that's a good combo. I don't think you need like 10 moves. I think you just need a couple moves that complement each other. If you're doing the speed rush, that's to the outside. So sometimes you'll get a tackle to overset. You'll get a tackle to go too far outside. That leaves him vulnerable to the inside where you can throw the spin move on him. And then if you mess him, then if you get it into his head that you throw the spin move and move inside, maybe he guards inside a little bit too much and leaves himself vulnerable to the speed rush to the outside. That's how McDonald's going to win. McDonald's probably not going to be a great run defender, but this Jets defense is built to handle one defensive end who doesn't play the run very well. Jets signed Carl Lawson back in 2021. His job was to get to the quarterback. Lawson was never a great run defender. Last year, Bryce Huff, phenomenal season, 10 sacks, less than half the snaps played. They didn't have him on the field for run defense. Huff is not a good run defender. The Jets defense is built so that one of the two defensive ends doesn't need to be a good run defender. And the reason for that is that the other defensive end needs to be very sturdy. Last year, that was John Franklin Myers, a 290-pound guy, very big for most defense. We talked about 240 being the lower limit for defensive ends. John Franklin Myers, the 280, 290 range, that's the upper limit for defensive ends. And essentially, the other, if you're one of your ends is not going to play the run, the other guy's got to be really sturdy. And JFM's not here anymore. And I think that's where Micheal Clemons comes in. And Robert Saleh this week in training camp, when he's spoken to the press, has said he thinks Clemons is a 3-down player. Now, the last couple of years, Clemons is entering year 3. I don't think Clemons has been awful. I don't think he's been anything special. I wonder how much, looking back, the decision to trade JFM was maybe a vote of confidence in Clemons, because his reps are increasing, and now especially with Reddick out, he's the number 3 defensive end. We've talked a lot on the show about how Jets essentially, if you look at the playing time under Robert Saleh, you have 3 defensive ends who get starter level snaps. And if Reddick's not going to be here, Clemons is going to become very important. There were a couple plays where Clemons made a difference in that preseason opener against Washington. I mean, there was one play where Jarek Bernard-Converse chased a guy down and played good run support, but Zaire Barnes was there to help Bernard-Converse clean up the tackle, and that's because the reason Barnes was able to do that was that Clemons absorbed a double team and essentially prevented an offensive lineman from getting out to block Zaire Barnes. So, the Clemens' job, like JFM, his job is going to be to do a lot of the dirty work. He may not put up huge numbers. JFM was not a guy who put up monster sack numbers, but JFM was a guy who did his job very effectively, because part of JFM's job was just to occupy double teams. And you look, JFM also beat his share of double teams, and last year had over 50 pressures. But your job is to do a lot of the stuff that doesn't necessarily make the stat sheet. And that's one of the things that makes this defense work. So as much as we will focus on McDonald has become an incredibly critical player for the Jets. No more Huff. Who knows with Reddick? McDonald now has to be one of the premium players on this defense. But behind him, there's a guy who's going to do things that, will not draw a ton of attention, but will be critical to making this defense work. And that's Micheal Clemons. And in these reps against Carolina, you don't want to overstate how important this preseason game is, because it doesn't count, but you can start to see, what these guys are going to be able to do for your team this year in these exhibition games and these reps. And it'll be worth watching. Also worth watching is any young rookie who is exciting you in training camp. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to the running back position. Jets actually have a pair of rookies who showing some promise. One in particular, they won't be starters because Breece Hall is the starting running back, but these rookies might get us excited. We'll talk about that as we continue here on this this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when it feels like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Therapy has so many benefits. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. This weekend is week 2 of the 2024 preseason. The Jets will be taking on the Carolina Panthers. We're talking about some players to watch on today's episode. And I think if you watched the Jets' first preseason game against the Washington Commanders, there was a player who really stood out, and it was Braylon Allen, the rookie out of Wisconsin, the guy we've talked a lot about on the show in the months since the Jets drafted him. And I've become a full convert to Braylon Allen. When the Jets drafted him, I was not super excited, and then I have to say before the Braylon Allen breakout in training camp, I started doing some more research on him, and I said, this kid might be a player, and he certainly looks like one. Now we're one preseason game into his career, and a couple weeks of training camp practices, so I don't want to put too much on him. But everything we've seen to this point suggests that this is a kid who has a shot to be a real player for this team, and it's very exciting. I always say this, and I think it's true. I think it's worth repeating, is that when we talk about training camp in the preseason, it's best to view this from a long-term perspective, not to get too caught up in what happens on Monday, what happens on Tuesday, what happens on Wednesday. Look at what the long-term trends are. Look at it over the course of a couple of weeks, over the course of a month. What are the things that you hear over and over and over? Because that's the important thing. Anybody could have a good day or a bad day. The question is, who's consistently shining? And the reports out of training camp are that Braylon Allen has looked really good. And we saw it firsthand. And Morgan Moses made a comment earlier this week, which was just great, where he talked about, I wish I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was something to the effect of, you can see it in the defender's eyes that they know there's going to be pain when they try and tackle Braylon Allen, a big back. And I got to be honest with you, part of me really wants Braylon Allen to succeed, because it'll teach the Jets a very important lesson that the Jets have not learned in a really long time. And that's running back is a young man's position. You draft the next stud running back. The Jets, for years, and this predates Joe Douglas, it predates Robert Saleh, they've brought in these big name backs at the end of their careers, and it usually does not work out. It did not work out with Frank Gore. It did not work out with Le'Veon Bell. It did not work out with Matt Forte. It did not work out with Chris Johnson. Controversial, I'm going to say it was not as good as people remember, even with LaDainian Tomlinson. I think people remember LaDainian Tomlinson as this major success with the Jets. He had a great first month in 2010, did some things in the 2010 playoffs. Outside of that, not spectacular performance by him either. Jets, stop bringing in these old backs. Instead of bringing in somebody else's great, instead of bringing in the back who used to be great for somebody else, find the next great back. Jets may be learning that lesson now. They of course drafted Breece Hall a couple of years ago. Then they kind of unlearned the lesson, because the latest incarnation of the back at the end of his career, the big name back, was Dalvin Cook last year, which completely failed. Well, maybe the Cook failure was what we finally needed to learn in order to make the right decision and try and draft the next back. And if you look at, Braylon Allen could be a phenomenal complement to Breece Hall. Everything, all the suggestions. I mean, you saw I think he got typecast as, just a power back, because he was 245 last year at Wisconsin. And whenever a back's that big, people are just going to assume that's all he can do. All he can do is just lower the shoulder and run with power. And Allen could do that, but you saw a burst against Washington. Not only that, you've seen soft hands. You've seen a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. And I think that one of the important things with Breece is Breece can handle a big workload, but you also want to preserve him. I don't think you want to have to give Breece, the 37 touches he got in the Week 18 game against New England last year. You want to be able to keep him fresh, because a fresh Breece Hall is going to be great. The thing is, the problem for the Jets last year is that when Breece Hall was not on the field, the quality of the carries went way down, because you were giving the ball to Dalvin Cook. So Breece Hall had to be on the field last year, because when Breece Hall was not on the field, the caliber of work just went way down. This year with Braylon Allen, if he's as good as he looks, the caliber of the carries you're going to get is not going to go down. And that just makes everybody better. And of course, it's also insurance. I don't want to raise the specter, but you remember 2 years ago, Breece Hall got injured, and that was we don't really talk about it as the thing that destroyed that 2022 Jets season, but it was. Jets were on a winning streak at that point, and the season completely changed after that. You hope Breece stays healthy, but Braylon Allen could also be insurance in that area. And I think Isaiah Davis he had a few moments in that preseason opener against Washington. He didn't look as good as Braylon Allen, but for all the consternation about the Jets drafting 2 running backs on day 3 this year, and I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say that drafting a number 2 and a number 3 running back in a draft class where you're short on picks, questionable process, but I think both of these guys have a shot to be very good. Now, at this point, my money's on Allen being the guy. But Isaiah Davis, he flashed some ability. He showed he could catch the ball out of the backfield against Washington, made a couple of plays. Again, we pale in comparison to what Allen's been doing, but this has the makings of a talented young Jets backfield right now. It has the makings of like a backfield where you have 3 backs who might be able to give you good carries. Now, Davis, I think, is going to be the number 3 back at this point. I think it's clear Allen's, kind of in the driver's seat for the number 2 running back. But it's just not, I'm looking forward to seeing them this weekend. Davis is interesting because he's a small school guy. And, there's always the question, how are you going to translate to the NFL coming out of the small school? And there's always a skepticism with the small school guy, because the question is, he was not facing NFL caliber talent when he was in college. So the question is, did he look that good because he's really an NFL caliber back, or did he look that good because the competition just wasn't very good? And these games are an opportunity for Davis to kind of show what he can do. They're an opportunity for Davis to show he belongs in the NFL. Now, granted, he'll be playing in the second half of these games. He'll be in probably, you'll see some action. Maybe he'll get some action in the second quarter. He's not going to be going up against the guys who are NFL caliber starters. He'll probably be playing second and third teamers, but that's what Davis is. And part of the way I view these preseason games is that if you're having success if you're a second and third teamer and you're having success against other teams' second and third teamers, well, then you're doing what you need to do. It shows that you're on that level. You're on the level of being a quality backup or third string. And I think that's what you're looking for out of Davis. And we all know running back is not the most important position on the field, but I think it's becoming easier to feel good about the Jets running back position, because I think there's a talent pipeline now at the running back position. And it's a young talent pipeline. We're not leaning on trying to squeeze the last production out of some old back like we've been in the past. We have Breece Hall, who, look, in my view, and you may disagree with this, I think Breece Hall has a shot to be one of the 5 best running backs in the NFL this year. With good blocking, I think you look at what he did last year, his ability to hit big plays. I think there's nothing to suggest that Breece Hall I think that Breece Hall can be elite. I'll put it that way. And Braylon Allen looking very promising, and Isaiah Davis. If Braylon Allen wasn't looking so good, I think we'd be excited about Isaiah Davis. So we're not going to see Breece this weekend, I don't think, but we probably will see more of Allen and more of Davis. And you're hoping to see them continue the positive things they've been doing to this point. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to a key player for the Jets this year, a player they drafted very early. Maybe not as key as he would be on other teams, but still a player who matters a lot. A player who's going to be seeing some changes. It's first round pick Olu Fashanu. Let's talk about what those changes are as we continue here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I don't want them to stop. But as the playoffs have wound down and the Olympics are now over, now we have fewer games. And the sports are not sportsing like I want them to. However, FanDuel helps us keep the sports going whenever we want, because all you have to do is open the app and dream up big bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So, even though the sports aren't sports in the way we want them to, we still have baseball, Yankees, Mets, other teams in action, making their playoff push. We're in the middle of August now, down the home stretch of the Major League Baseball season. But, we're also in NFL preseason. We're getting close to the start of the regular season. Less than a month away, the Jets will be on the field in San Francisco as week 1 underdogs. If you think they're going to win, FanDuel is the place to go to get in on the action. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, getting ready for week 2 in the preseason. The Jets will be playing the Carolina Panthers this Saturday in Charlotte. We're talking about some key players to watch for the New York Jets in this game. Now, guy I thought played very well in the opener was Olu Fashanu. Did not give up a pressure, now committed a penalty, a false start on his first snap. As I mentioned on Monday's show, first NFL game, first NFL snap. You commit a false start. I'm going to go out on the limb and say maybe nerves played a role in that. I'm not overly worried that Fashanu is going to be a false start machine, even if, there's one point where I guess you could joke that, say this in jest, that at the start of his career, he had a 100% false start rate, one play, one false start, but that's obviously going to go down, and I'm not overly worried about that. I think my takeaway from Fashanu week 1 against Washington was that he played well. He did not give up a pressure. And as I mentioned the other day, my goal for Fashanu this year when he takes the field is for him to just look like he belongs. It's tough to ask a rookie to step in and play at a Pro Bowl level. Now, I think in the long run, that's what the Jets want him to be. Down the line, the Jets want to be an excellent tackle, but it takes time to adjust to the tackle position in the NFL. If Fashanu just looks like a guy who can hold up okay as a rookie, he'll be well on his way to a successful career. This week, Robert Saleh mentioned that the Jets are going to start giving him some time at right tackle. I would not be surprised to see Fashanu play some right tackle in Carolina on Saturday. And this kind of shows you the balance, the dance the Jets are trying to do, because there's kind of like two competing goals with Fashanu. One is to develop him long term, and the other is to win games. And this is not like a Jets only issue. All 32 teams have to strike this balance with their young players, because Olu Fashanu is the long-term left tackle of the future for the Jets. And I think you want the bulk of his reps to be at left tackle, because he's taking over for Tyron Smith after this season. Smith's here for 1 year. It's pretty clear that Smith is here for the 2024 season. Then he's going somewhere else if he's not retiring, because Olu Fashanu is going to be the guy who takes over at left tackle next season. But the Jets need to win games this year, and Fashanu is the third best tackle on the roster, which means that, if anything happens to Morgan Moses at right tackle, Fashanu is probably going there. He's probably playing on the right side. So in the long run, as many reps as possible at left tackle is what's good for Fashanu. But what's good for the Jets this year is Fashanu learning how to play the right tackle position. And again, this is not me saying this is only the Jets. All 32 teams are dealing with some version of this. It's one of the things you have to balance in order to make your team successful. It's not that this is an enormous test for the Jets. It's a basic test, and you hope that they find the right balance. Because if something happens to Moses, Fashanu is going to be better than Carter Warren or Max Mitchell. You don't want those guys seeing big snaps this year. You saw what happened last year when the Jets had to go deep into their depth at the tackle position. You want to have a quality backup. I've said this many times on the show that I feel like in the NFL, you really want to have 3 starting caliber tackles. That's easy to say, tough to do. I think there's a very real possibility that in 2024, the New York Jets have 3 starting caliber tackles. And that's a good thing for them, because, even if we get past Tyron Smith's injury history, even if we get past the ages of Moses and Smith, and those are both very important. Those are, there are studies that have shown that the 2 things that are most predictive of future injuries are past injuries and age. And with the Jets, both of their tackles are old, and one of their tackles has a pretty extensive injury history. So you can expect the third tackle is going to be on the field anyway. But even if you're dealing with guys who were young and had a history of being durable, injuries do happen on the offensive line. It's a spot where there's a lot of contact. There's lots of bodies rolling around. I mean, sometimes you just take an unfortunate step somewhere and someone rolls up on you. It's a tough spot. And the Jets need to get Fashanu ready. So I think it's going to be worth watching how Fashanu holds up, especially if he plays the right tackle position, because he's used to playing on the left side. Now, should he be able to hold up at right tackle? Yeah, but it's different. It's kind of like you're kind of like doing things the opposite of the way you used to. What you used to do with your right hand and right leg, now you're doing with your the other hand and leg. It's just it's a little tricky. It can be a little tricky, especially someone who's used to only playing on one side, and especially for somebody who's being developed to play exclusively on the left side. I mean, I think it's clear that Olu Fashanu's future is as the left tackle of the New York Jets, but it's not unprecedented for a young guy to change positions for his rookie season to kind of ease him into the league. It's not uncommon for a guy who plays left tackle in college to maybe get a few reps at right tackle as a rookie and then move over to the left side full time in year 2. We're not talking about uncharted territory here. It just will be interesting to see how Fashanu holds up. Key player for the Jets this year. It's interesting because normally when you draft a tackle in the top 11, he's a key player because he's starting for you. the Jets have the luxury of bringing Olu Fashanu along slowly this year. It's not often that you get a chance to just allow a young guy to sit at the left tackle position, because normally if you're drafting a tackle top 11, you have a desperate immediate need. Jets had a desperate need longer term. Jets had a desperate need for a year down the line. They did not have a desperate immediate need, which means they have a chance to kind of develop Fashanu. But part of this scenario means that Fashanu's got to play right tackle. He's going to have to learn how to play on the right side. And our first experience watching him there could be this Saturday. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Enjoy your Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week.